He was underestimated, dismissed, and treated like a fool until he revealed a legal fraud right before the judge's eyes. The courtroom had already squared off against him before he had even uttered a word. Jared Calloway stepped forward. His suit was a bit too worn, his tie was slightly askew, but his stance was firm. He wasn't a lawyer. Never claimed to be. He was merely a man adamant about not allowing his grandmother's home to be taken by a corporate giant that regarded people as nothing more than digits on a balance sheet. Judge Walter Grayson peered over his glasses, the corners of his mouth twitching in a way that wasn't quite a smirk yet wasn't far from it either. He leaned back in his chair, gently tapping his gavel on the bench. Mr. Calloway, representing yourself? The question dripped with amusement. Jared met his gaze. Yes, Your Honor. A chuckle resonated from across the room. Bryce Sterling. The opposing attorney deliberately adjusted his cufflinks. A corporate bulldog with a history of steamrolling small-time defendants, Sterling had come to do what he did best, win, and Jared, he didn't even view him as a real challenge. This should be a quick affair, Sterling muttered under his breath to his assistant, who offered a knowing smile. Jared overheard it. He was meant to hear it, that was the point. But he kept his expression neutral. He'd been counted out before he understood what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated. That's why he was here, the judge sighed. Rifling through a file. This is a property dispute, correct? A foreclosure challenge. Jared nodded. Yes, sir. My grandmother's home. Grayson barely gave him a glance. And you believe you can argue this case against a veteran attorney like Mr. Sterling? Jared didn't flinch. I don't believe, Your Honor. I know. The courtroom fell quiet. A few muffled chuckles emerged from the corporate side of the room. But there was something else too, something unexpressed, the kind of silence that settles when someone unexpected refuses to back down. Judge Grayson shook his head. Very well. Let's proceed. But Jared wasn't merely here to argue, he was here to win. And they had no inkling of what was to come, but the judge's skepticism was just the beginning. The real obstacle was about to emerge from the man seated across the aisle, the one who thought Jared had already lost. Bryce Sterling adjusted his tie with a self-satisfied grin. This was his domain. The courtroom, the rules. The strategy. He had crushed others like Jared Calloway before, a man lacking a degree. No firm supporting him, no experience. This wasn't a case, it was merely a warm-up. Judge Grayson exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed with your opening statement. Sterling rose with practiced ease, buttoning his jacket as he advanced toward the jury. His voice was smooth and self-assured. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is straightforward. He gestured at Jared without bothering to look at him. We have a man who refuses to face reality. The property in question was legally obtained by my client through proper foreclosure. The law is explicit. The facts are undeniable. This is not about feelings. This is about contracts, deadlines, and obligations. My client adhered to the law. Mr. Calloway did not. A well-timed pause, a slow turn. Then a casual shrug. I sympathize. Losing a home is hard, but pain does not mitigate legal responsibility. The numbers are verifiable. He nodded once at the judge and then resumed his seat, hands folded. As if the case was already done, Jared remained still. Unfazed. He had anticipated this, but as he rose from his seat, he noticed Judge Grayson leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, watching. A man skeptical of something he didn't believe was worthy of his time. Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen. Jared cleared his throat. Voice firm. Mr. Sterling is right about one thing. The law is explicit. The real question is, does his client actually follow it? A flicker of annoyance passed over Sterling's face. Jared continued, I have spent the last 6 months studying every case, every regulation, every loophole that banks and corporations employ to strip homes away from families, and I've uncovered something. Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow. Something? Jared nodded. Yes, and it alters everything. Sterling chuckled softly. Oh, this should be interesting. Jared disregarded him, instead turning to the judge. Before I start, Your Honor, I'd like to file an official request for discovery because I have grounds to believe the plaintiff is concealing something. The courtroom shifted. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. Now concealing what, Mr. Calloway? Jared's eyes locked onto Sterling. Fraud. And just like that, laughter vanished from the room. The word fraud hung in the atmosphere like a fuse slowly igniting. Sterling's grin faded. And for the first time, Judge Grayson cast Jared more than a mere cursory look. Fraud? The judge's voice held a note of doubt, but beneath it was curiosity. Jared nodded. Yes. Your Honor, I believe the foreclosure on my grandmother's home was founded on forged documents, and I can substantiate that if I'm permitted to request full discovery. Sterling let out a sharp exhale, shaking his head. Your Honor, this is ludicrous, a frivolous accusation intended to stall the inevitable. The property was seized under standard foreclosure protocols. Jared tilted his head. Standard? Taking a step forward, his voice steadied. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, how standard is it for a bank to foreclose on a house when the original mortgage documents display 2 different signatures from the same individual? The courtroom stirred. Some murmurs erupted from the audience. Sterling's jaw tightened. What are you referring to? Jared reached into his folder, producing 2 copies of the original mortgage agreement. He approached the bailiff and handed them over to the judge. These are 2 distinct copies of the same document. Your Honor, One from the initial filing and one from a subsequent modification. If you examine the signatures, you'll see they do not match. Judge Grayson leaned in, scrutinizing the pages, his brow furrowing. Jared continued, "Now, I'm no expert, but I recognize my grandmother's signature and the second one. That's not hers." The judge flipped through the papers, his demeanor switching from dismissive to engaged. He looked up at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, do you have an explanation for this?" Sterling cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is an effort to complicate the issue. Signatures can evolve over time." Jared pressed on. "Perhaps, but that second signature pertains to a document filed merely 3 months after the original, and if you compare them side by side," he gestured toward the papers in the judge's hand, "you'll see that not only do they appear completely different, but the second one was signed the day after my grandmother was hospitalized due to a stroke." A wave of reaction swept through the courtroom. Even the jury leaned in closer. Judge Grayson addressed Sterling now, his tone more authoritative. "Mr. Sterling, does your client possess the original signed documents on file?" Sterling hesitated. It was quick, barely perceptible. But Jared noticed it, and so did the judge. We would require time to retrieve them." "Your Honor," Jared smiled. "That's perfectly fine, I'll wait." The atmosphere in the room felt different now. It wasn't just curiosity. It was skepticism, but Jared wasn't merely there to poke holes in their narrative, he was there to dismantle it piece by piece, and this was just the beginning. Judge Grayson let out a breath through his nose, flipping through the documents. Once again his eyes darted between the inconsistent signatures, his fingers tapping against the bench. The judge, who had been so certain of Jared's incompetence, now seemed intrigued. Sterling, however, was already attempting to regain control. "Your Honor, these documents don't alter the essence of the case." The defendant is grasping at straws, hoping to delay the inevitable. "The bank followed legal procedures. That's what is important." Jared allowed the words to settle before responding. "Followed legal procedures?" He exhaled softly, shaking his head. "Mr. Sterling, are you even aware from whom your client acquired this debt?" Sterling blinked. "What does that pertain to?" Jared turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the mortgage changed hands 3 times before it reached the current lender, 3 separate transactions. Yet the transfer paperwork," he paused, taking out another document from his folder and delivering it to the bailiff. "That's where it becomes intriguing." Grayson examined the papers, his jaw tightening. Jared continued, "Every time the loan changed ownership, it should have been accompanied by an endorsement, an official transfer from one lender to the next." "Yet look closely." Sterling shifted uneasily in his chair. Grayson's brows knitted together. "There's no signature on the final transfer." Jared nodded. "Precisely, which indicates the last company had no legal authority to foreclose on my grandmother's home, and the bank that executed the foreclosure never truly owned the loan in the first place." A hushed murmur spread through the courtroom. The tension in the air grew thick. Sterling leaned in, his voice taut. "Your Honor, this is—" Grayson interrupted. "This is a significant issue." Jared inhaled slowly. He had them exactly where he wanted them. They had underestimated him, mocked him. But now they were no longer laughing. But unveiling the fraud was one thing, establishing intent was another, and that was where Jared was preparing to strike them the hardest. Sterling's expression had lost its smugness. The confidence he exuded at the trial's beginning was beginning to wane. And Jared observed it. The man who had regarded this case as a mere formality was now scrambling to reclaim control. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his tone incisive. "Mr. Sterling, I presume your client has an explanation for why this mortgage was transferred without appropriate endorsement?" Sterling hesitated. "Your Honor, I would need to consult with my client before providing a statement." Jared tilted his head. "You mean the same client who has submitted legally dubious documents in numerous foreclosure cases just like this one?" Sterling shot his gaze toward him. "That's an outrageous accusation." Jared remained unfazed. "Is it? Because I took the initiative to investigate your client's foreclosure history, it appears my grandmother's home isn't the only one they acquired under these exact conditions." Another document, another piece of evidence handed up to the judge. Judge Grayson perused the papers, his expression darkening. He exhaled slowly, looking up at Sterling. "This case isn't shaping up to be as straightforward as you claim." Sterling's jaw tightened. But before he could respond, Jared pressed ahead. "Your Honor, I propose to call a witness." Grayson looked at him. "A witness?" Jared nodded. "Yes, the individual who notarized the second mortgage signature, the one I suspect was forged." A quiet gasp resonated from the audience. This wasn't merely about missing paperwork anymore. Jared was about to introduce someone into the courtroom who could dismantle the entire case. Sterling stood up instantly. "Your Honor, this is highly unusual. This witness was not disclosed prior." Jared faced him, his voice even. "That's because I only located her yesterday, and what she revealed to me—" He let the silence linger for a moment. "Changes everything." Judge Grayson scrutinized him, then shifted his attention to Sterling. "I'm permitting it." Sterling stiffened. He was aware this was no longer going in his direction, but Jared's most significant move was still to come. For the witness wasn't simply any notary, she was the one individual who could unravel the case completely. The door at the back of the courtroom creaked open and a woman entered. Linda Myers, a notary public, appeared tense as she proceeded to the stand. She adjusted her glasses, Her fingers gripping the railing. Judge Grayson signaled her to state your full name and occupation for the record. She cleared her throat. Linda Myers, I'm a licensed notary public. Jared stood, his voice steady but emphatic. Miss Myers, do you recall notarizing the second mortgage modification for my grandmother, Alma Calloway? Linda hesitated, glancing at Sterling. I do. Jared nodded. And were you present when she signed the document? Another pause. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. Sterling squirmed in his seat. Jared waited, allowing her some time. Finally, Linda exhaled. No, I wasn't. A gasp cascaded through the courtroom. Judge Grayson's eyes sharpened. Jared continued. Miss Myers, did you witness anyone else signing on her behalf? She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. No. Jared stepped closer. Then how did the document get notarized? Linda's hands trembled slightly. I received the paperwork from a bank representative. I was informed it had already been signed, and I just needed to stamp it. Another shock wave traveled through the room. She had just confessed that the signature was notarized without proper verification, rendering the entire foreclosure process illegal. Sterling leaped up from his seat. Objection! This is hearsay, Your Honor. She cannot establish the authenticity of... Judge Grayson raised a hand, cutting him off. Overruled. His tone had lost any hint of patience. He redirected to Linda. Miss Myers, do you understand the legal ramifications of what you've just stated? Linda nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes, sir. I didn't know at the time, but I ought to have. Sterling sat down. Running a hand down his face, he recognized it was over. Jared turned back to the judge. Your Honor, given this testimony, the forged signature, and the absent mortgage transfer endorsements, I move to have this foreclosure annulled. My grandmother's home was taken through fraudulent means, and now the evidence is right before you. Silence enveloped the room. Judge Grayson exhaled slowly, tapping his gavel on the bench when he finally spoke. His voice was resolute. The court rules in favor of the defendant. The foreclosure is annulled. The property is to be returned at once. Jared released a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding the weight. The struggle, the months of relentless research had all culminated in this moment. He turned, catching a glimpse of Sterling's hollow stare. The man who once dismissed him as insignificant had just been defeated before an entire courtroom, but Jared wasn't focused on him anymore. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. His grandmother's home would not be taken, not today, not ever. But the lesson wasn't solely about winning a case, it was about standing up even when no one believes you can. Jared stepped outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the steps. He paused, taking a slow breath. The air felt different. Not lighter, not freer. Just real, the kind of real that settles in when a battle is finally over. His grandmother's home was secure. That was all that truly mattered. A few spectators from the gallery trickled out behind him, their voices murmuring. Some whispered about the case, others discussing him. He caught fragments of words like never saw it coming. And that man should be a lawyer, but Jared didn't seek validation. He never had. What he needed was justice, and today he achieved it. A voice called out from behind him. Calloway. Jared turned to see Judge Grayson standing at the top of the courthouse steps, hands in his pockets. The arrogance from earlier had vanished, replaced by something more measured. You surprised me in there. The judge's tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Jared met his gaze. You weren't the only one. Grayson regarded him for a moment before offering a slight nod. Ever thought about law school? Jared let out a quiet laugh. Not really. Grayson smirked. Just for a brief moment. You might want to reconsider. You've got a knack for making people squirm, and with that, he turned and went back into the courthouse. Jared exhaled, shaking his head. Law school. Maybe not. But one thing was clear, if anyone ever tried to take what was his again, they'd better prepare for a fight, because power doesn't just reside with those who have wealth and titles, it belongs to those who refuse to yield. And if this case demonstrated anything, it was this: the underestimated always have the most to prove, and when given the opportunity, they don't just win. They change everything. If you found this story as compelling as the courtroom did, hit that subscribe button, because in the real world the battle for justice doesn't stop here.